Close to a clearing, in the middle of a field, at the peak of a hill or on the slopes of a heath, stand stone giants which have stood for thousands of years. They mark the landscape with a mysterious trace. Raising giant stones has been a part of many cultures around the world. However, the most spectacular and the most ancient forms are found on the French Atlantic coast and in the United Kingdom. These imposing stone blocks, called megaliths, from Greek megas, meaning great, and lithos, meaning stone, raise many questions. Some people think they are monuments.
If this stone was raised for someone, they must have been important.
Others ask what force can have raised them.
Could it be that our ancient ancestors somehow knew and manipulated frequency of levitation?
Are these constructions the work of architects or artists?
We ask if it was the same hand that carved all these rocks, in which case the artist would be the Michelangelo of their time.
Are the megaliths vestiges of ancient beliefs?
It's obvious that the stones are laid out in some form of astrological or cosmic thinking behind them.
Surrounded by mystery and legend, the megaliths attract scientists, artists, adventurers, and followers from everywhere. For centuries, mankind has wondered about the origins and significance of these strange monuments. In the Middle Ages, they were seen as the work of the devil or of giants who lived on the earth before the Great Flood. Later, they were attributed to the Druids, Celtic priests who raised them in order to celebrate their rituals. Those with a fertile imagination connect them with supernatural forces or extraterrestrial visitors. Whatever the theories put forward, they always raised the same questions. Who raised these monuments? When? How? And why? These questions will come up during our voyage to some iconic sites, from the west of France to the far north of Scotland. Carnac is our first stop. The men here, long stones in Celtic, are arranged in impressive lines. The site is unique in the world, for there are more than 3,000 stones aligned over nearly 4 kilometers. The age of the site has been estimated to be 4,000 years BC, thanks to carbon-14 dating of charcoal found at the base of some men here. At first sight, the groups are just alignments of uncut stones, but to a careful observer, the arrangement is a lot more complex than it seems.
When you progress along these alignments, there's a surprising effect of perspective. There's this gentle slope and at the same time, the small hill which is really emphasized by the size of the monoliths, which get bigger and bigger. But there's more to it than that. Some studies have shown that these quarried stones here often have an outcrop side and a quarried side, which means that all this granite emerged from the ground and was extracted from the site. And there are groups of rows like that, where there are 2 lines of dressed stones and the sides which were cut, which are flatter, are all turned inwards. I mean to say it's an arrangement which is planned. It hasn't happened by chance. If that allows a particular pathway or a kind of procession, it's difficult to imagine, but it's very possible. Whether there was an architect to manage the work is very hard to tell. There was surely very, very strong symbolic and social context, but I think we're far from having all the answers. When it comes to the orientation of the rows, when we analyze a lot of these, we can see that there are very few or none which correspond to any special astronomical axis. There's no alignment truly oriented towards the rising of the sun, solstice, or lunar axes. The principle behind this and the concept of emplacement is something else entirely.
The logic behind the emplacement of menhir in this landscape is the subject which Christian Obelts, a self-educated archaeologist, is exploring. Christian has been traveling the Brittany landscape for 25 years, trying to understand the geographical placement of these alignments. The site of Kersahou, a few kilometers from Carnac, is one of his favorite stops.
I'll show you the plan made by the English geometrist Murray Vickers in 1832. He was a great geometrist who was working for the English crown. So here's what he saw when he came in 1832. The alignment where we are. There's 2 kilometers, 100 meters from one end to the other of the alignment. It's the largest group of standing stones known in Europe. What's the most surprising is that the lines aren't straight at all, and people say, why? The relief justifies the changes of direction. For example, here you see that the lines of menhir are all going in the same direction. And when you come to this path, which is just beside a stream, there's a change of direction. Then the lines will bend and reach up to this rocky ridge. Every change of direction corresponds with the line to a hill or water.
The inclusion of the menhir in their natural surroundings seems to have been a major concern of our ancestor builders. They were doubtless led by aesthetic logic, but also by a symbolic quality. It's true that these lines of stone stretching out through the landscape are impressive.
It's a symbol of the power of this people. There's really the idea that the territory is barred off by something. It's the symbol of an ethnic group belonging to a great family, a large community, with a common culture which does this.
However, a major question remains. Why were these monumental groups raised? Commemorative stones for people or events, ceremonial places, territory markers. There are many hypotheses, but the answer lies forever buried with the minds of our ancestors.
It has to be said that about everything concerning the daily life of these people, their dwellings, very little data is available. There have been a few excavations made of the habitations. I think we're missing a great many elements.
The megaliths are an illustration of the great change in human history between 6,000 and 2,000 years BC. This period is known as the Neolithic and is the time when our hunter-gatherer ancestors became sedentary, invented agriculture, animal farming, and built tombs to bury their dead. Their collective tombs, called dolmen, appeared at the same period as the menhir. They are built of a horizontal slab of stone posed on vertical stones which hold it up.
The humans of the Neolithic went inside this corridor and placed bodies all along it. We know there could be more than 10, up to 100 bodies inside.
Dolmen, like menhir, bear witness to the birth of a culture 6,000 years ago.
It's really the start of our own culture, because it's the first time in the history of humanity that people made something which was not just made for survival purposes.
But how did people manage in 4000 BC to extract these enormous blocks of stone?
The Neolithic people worked at the fissures, making little notches. They just had to put bits of wood into these and then soak them in water for the wood to swell and finally crack open the rock a little more. And there, that's really the face they cracked. As well as that, it's a typical case. There are extraction notches on either side. There are 2 notches here and 2 there.
While the raising of these stones must have happened during great gatherings of people, the sheer number put in place must have taken hundreds of years. The sight of these thousands of standing stones raises an immediate question. Why are they concentrated at Carnac and the area around it?
There must have been a very dense population, or otherwise a place where gatherings were inevitable to raise these cut stones and gigantic monuments.
et ces monuments gigantesques.
In 4000 BC, was the Brittany coast a kind of El Dorado, attracting a dense population?
In the Neolithic, they had everything here. Excellent land, the sea, cultural and business exchanges by boat. And it's probable that the making of salt was the reason for the region being so rich. You can see that it's the sea's edge that is literally bordered with these pillars. And by looking at the Carnac alignments, you can really see their idea of a barrier of stones when you come up from there. It's really a kind of wall marking the start of the land, where there's a great number of these standing stones.
While most of these menhir are part of groups, others, more isolated, immediately attract us by their size and their particular placing.
This enormous menhir is the highest raised nowadays on the Morbihan coast. We don't know its total length, but it's close to 6 meters high, just a little bit less. It's clear that it being outside the rows of monoliths gives it a very special value. The fact that it's the biggest, the most important, would mean if it's the stone of a person, they were very important, or the values attributed to them were. We're in the domain of mythology, which invents an entire people, and I think it's the start of our modern myths, which gradually will take shape here and develop over time.
So menhir symbolize the emergence of a mysterious culture. Sometimes it takes a detective's eye to see and decode all their secrets.
What's really amazing is that because of this lovely ambient light and the strong sunlight, there are carvings which appear on the menhirs. This is one that isn't known of, in my opinion. You can see a whole series of horizontal cuts, and you can follow them up to here. There are even some a little lower. And there you are. I'd say that's a real discovery. I think if we checked all carvings on all the menhirs with a strong nightlight, we'd make a number of discoveries. I think there's a lot left to discover in these alignments.
Far from being just big blocks of raw stone planted in the ground, the menhir were perhaps once carved. Most of these carvings have been worn away by wind and rain, but some, protected from the weather, have crossed the millennia.
There's a whole series of snakes carved here. You can clearly see the winding snake body with head positioned here. There's another one beside it there.
The symbolic aspect of megaliths is omnipresent. Bearing witness to this are the carvings on some stones, as well as the spatial organization of the groups of stones. Sometimes the architecture of the sites is surprisingly precise. This is true of Stonehenge, the geometric structure of which is a model. Sited 150 kilometers west of London, Stonehenge is the most complete form of what the Celts called a cromlech, a stone circle. It was built in 3 phases between 3000 and 1500 BC, more than 1,000 years after Carnac. The Giant's Dance, as it was known in the Middle Ages, has attracted archaeologists for decades. Astronomical observatory, royal tomb, ceremonial place, memorial, the explanations follow each new discovery, but for some, the magic of the place is beyond explanation. Some regular visitors, roaming adventurers, come and stop here every year to feel the place's beauty. Chris and Rob are 2 pillars of this community of Stonehenge lovers. They set up house here for a few weeks on the roads which border the site, and despite the fences, let the atmosphere of the place wash over them.
There's something about this place that causes you to reflect on your mortality and your sense of life and what it's about.
There is something that draws me that I can't quite explain. Every time I try and do something else or go somewhere else or concentrate on another part of my life, it kind of turns me around and brings me back here.
There's a power to this place. You look at the world in a different way. You know, we have all this chaos going on around us in our lives, but you come here and you kind of put it in perspective. It's something stable and tangible in a changing world.
Such a place should have a caretaker, and Rob sometimes feels he has been given this job.
I think maybe I'm here just to watch over it, maybe just to make sure that it's kind of looked after, you know.
It's obvious that the stones are laid out in some form of astrological, cosmic thinking behind them because of the nature of the geometry that lies behind it.
Perhaps this is the reason that Stonehenge has become a place of pilgrimage.
Hundreds of generations people have been gathering here. People come here from all over the world to gather, and there's got to be a common theme between them. I don't know, maybe it's just something that's built into us. So we need some places like this as a species to gather together and just be.
For our ancestors, Stonehenge was without doubt a solar temple which marked the season's passing during large gatherings. The celebrations held here 5,000 years ago are perpetuated today. At the time of the summer solstice, on the night of the 20th to the 21st of June, an immense crowd drawn from all around the world gather to celebrate sunrise on the first day of summer.
My name's King Arthur, I'm a senior druid, and I am here to celebrate the solstice. And what we're here to celebrate is the rebirth of the sun on the longest day. We will do it with poetry, we will do it with verse, we will do it with ritual, and we will do it with up to 37,000 people, because this is a gathering of the tribes.
This is the Festival of Light for the Celts. It's the time when the night is shortest in the year, so it's a very important festival for us, a festival to be shared.
While Stonehenge can inspire modern druids, the site has, however, no link with the first Celts who appeared 2,000 years after it was built. The force which emanates from this place doubtless explains the fascination felt for this imposing monument.
The energy that comes from the stones at this time of year is really overwhelming.
There's natural energies along the earth, and the ancient peoples knew this. That is why they were attracted to the spot. That's why they built the stones. That's one of the things that may have helped them build the stones.
It's sort of like an energy point of the planet. You know, you can't have millions of people drawn to the same place for thousands of years for nothing. Do you know what I mean? It's just, you know, it's a special place. It's like a church.
I proposed to my lady in there.
I said yes.
Nowadays, everyone has their own reasons for coming to celebrate summer solstice at Stonehenge, but archaeologists are unanimous that the Circle of Giant Stones was certainly the site of great gatherings.
I like to imagine that this is the same sort of thing that was going on 5,000 years ago.
Stonehenge was built at a time when we mankind are changing from hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists. The ancients built this so they knew what time of year it was, and the reason was that is a great solar clock. It does not tell you the time of day, it tells you the time of year. Now, if you think about it, if they got it wrong, the frost would get the crop. If they planted at the wrong time, the whole of their society, their tribe would be wiped out. They had to get it right. And the way they got it right was by observing the movement of the stars and the sun. And that is what this temple is designed for. That is what it does, and that is why some of us still celebrate to this day.
"4,000 years ago, the celebrations were doubtless accompanied by singing, music and dance. Some archaeologists have theorized that the structure of Stonehenge was designed so as to help sound to be diffused during ceremonies.
I'm a dancer, I love to dance and I love music. And I believe that music can change your mood, and I believe music can change where your consciousness lies. It can put you in a dreamlike state, and I think that is something that's recognised through shamanic teachings all over the world. And I think, as well as being a temple of light, as well as being something to do with the sun, I think it's also, it was done in a way that the acoustics were very important as well. It can be anything just from being able to hear somebody speak, like in a lecture theatre. Or it could be, as I said, to help aid people to change their state of consciousness, to allow themselves to be more open.
Stonehenge has inspired minds from its creation right to our time. The power of its structure and its style fascinate. The site has been copied in different forms down through the centuries. In 1820, the Sheriff of Yorkshire had the Druid temple built, with its structure and proportions inspired strongly by Stonehenge. The sacrificial altar in the middle of the construction and the mysterious atmosphere it has fed many rumors of satanic ceremonies and of secret society meetings. Much more recently, a post-industrial version of the famous site of Stonehenge was created in the USA during the 1970s. Carnhenge is a faithful reproduction of the Neolithic site. Compressed cars have replaced the stones, but the solar orientation has been respected. A way of being faithful to the astral clock face of the original site. The question recurs, were, like Stonehenge, megalithic sites used as seasonal clocks? The reason for the theory that they are oriented towards the stars becomes clear when they are seen from above. Laurent Lescop, an architect with a passion for archaeology, wishes to test this theory scientifically at the Calanais site in Morbihan. He is there with his son to explore the question.
The important thing here is that there's a very particular story attached to Calanais. It has the reputation of being oriented towards the stars, and especially towards the sunrise at the summer and winter solstices. So you could say it's a sort of little Stonehenge, at least that's its reputation. The idea is to make a survey of the site. So we're taking advantage of time when the light is relatively even. The morning is ideal, so as not to have shadows cast or contrast which are too strong. The idea is to photograph the zone entirely, taking shots from every angle, and then to reconstitute it all using 3D software. These blue squares are the camera positions. This here is a faithful model and carefully oriented, because our concern here is to have a perfectly precise orientation, so afterwards we can simulate the course of the sun. So here we have an arc which corresponds to the sun's position each hour. Here in 4000 BC, and in comparison with today's situation, in the morning we have in this direction the sun which rises at the angle, and in the evening the sun will set at the angle.
Et le soir, le soleil va se coucher effectivement à l'angle.
In 4000 years BC, our farmer ancestors were certainly aware of the natural phenomena that gave rhythm to working the land. Some megalithic sites could have served as observatories to measure the course of the sun and cycle of the seasons.
Well, to know whether these sites were oriented in this way, with that idea in mind, to know if that was the initial idea, the objective, it's difficult to say one way or the other. But saying that they could have been part of a kind of spatial and temporal marker, I think so.
The solar orientation of Crucono has caused debate following restoration of the site by Félix Gaillard, one of the pioneers of megalith archaeology at the end of the 19th century.
Félix Gaillard protected and restored the site in 1887. And what's important is that he wrote about it 10 years later and published a book which was quite important, called Prehistoric Astronomy. And the fact the site was perfectly oriented towards the solstices fit the theory perfectly. It was widely said that the site was intentionally replaced so that it corresponded very well to the theory.
Christian Obletz, tireless megalith explorer, has come to make his own examination of the site because for him, the astral orientation of Crucono remains uncertain.
The presence of a great number of monoliths taken into the walls, which are now hidden by vegetation, suggests that this was much more than a simple rectangle. I've worked on the archives, and it gets really interesting. The big surprise is that when you study the plan made by Murray Vickers, you see that instead of there being 22 monoliths, there are 50 or so, and they don't at all form a structure like that. Today, what has been conserved is that, and that. All the rest has been destroyed, except for a few stones that you can see here and there. Once again, the plan was made in 1832, so what was there before?
Trying to rewind time and unlock the secrets of the megaliths is the objective of archaeologists like Deborah Anderson. She regularly braves the wind and cold of the wild fringes of Scotland to visit the site of Calanais. Known as the Stonehenge of the North, this stone circle is found on Lewis Island in the extreme north of Scotland. Its very special location leads to our thinking that the structure is linked to the lunar cycle.
The Isle of Lewis is actually on 58 degrees north alignment. So the lunar standstill only happens at 58 degrees. The only other place it happens is 58 degrees south in Cape Horn in southern Chile. So, you know, Calanais, part of it was built specifically with that lunar alignment in mind. Lunar alignment only happens every 18.9 years, and it's when the moon is closest to the horizon, how it skims. And there's a set of hills over there that actually looks like a woman lying on their back. And during the lunar standstill, the moon skirts the hills there.
This astonishing display inspired artist Christina Waldzug, and she became quite passionate about the site.
This figure has the name Sleeping Woman, or Old Woman of the Moors. So from this point, it looks like the moon is born from the figure and then glides across the sky and disappears behind this hill and then is reborn. When you're standing at the bottom of the avenue, it looks like it sinks into the ring, and it's an absolutely spectacular event. So I wanted to recreate that in my paintings.
The orientation of Calanais according to the lunar axis has attracted attention since antiquity.
There was a Greek historian called Diodorus that mentioned that there was a lunar temple on this kind of 58-degree north alignment.
According to other ancient manuscripts, Calanais was the place where the goddess of the moon visited Earth every 19 years. Perhaps it was to capture the power of the moon that the people of the north raised this stone circle, there where the full solstice moon touched the mountaintops. Raised in 3000 BC, this site is unique in Europe because it brings together in one place all three main forms of megalithic structures: alignments, stone circles, and a tomb.
This is what you call the chambered tomb, which was inserted after the monolith and the stone circle. This would have had burials in there, communal burials.
Burying the dead was a major cultural, social, and spiritual development for our ancestors 5,000 years ago.
The Neolithic sees an entire reworking of the relationship of people with nature. Before, in the Mesolithic, you were part of nature, you moved around the landscape. Your special places were natural places. In the Neolithic, when you start settling in one place, they start building monuments, you know, and there's that relationship. We own this land. This is why chambered cairns were built on hills. These are our ancestors, this is our land.
As for many megalith sites, the placing of the site of Calanais within its landscape has been thought out.
You often find stone circles very close to water bodies, and it's this liminality between the living and the dead and the water and the land that seems to be so important to the monument builders of stone circles.
The representations which guided the conception of Calanais have been revisited 5,000 years later by Christina Walczuk. In the gallery she runs with her husband Roger, the paintings on show are full of symbolic elements.
I like to get the emotional point of view, the spiritual point of view, and I used to be a figurative artist, and now I try and pick out the figurative element in the landscape and the stones. I've included the crow flying because in Celtic mythology it represents death, and this figure looks like it's a skeleton, so we actually see this as something that dies and is reborn as in relationship to the moon. I personally think it's a woman who's just given birth. Now this is the skeleton who implies death, and I like to think this is life, death, and the cycle of life.
While Christina puts the finishing touches to her latest work, Roger goes to the site looking for symbols.
Coming up to the stones now, some people have noticed images on the stones, and we're artists and that's what we're interested in. I don't know if you notice here, there's an image of a face, like a woman's face, a bit like an Egyptian sort of face. Well, this we call the woman stone. From inside, this one we refer to as the male stone because it's obviously very phallic. The female stone and the male stone work together to form a box, those shelves there, from a box where the midsummer sunrise just after it shines a beam of light. So this stone is bringing the energies of the sun into the ring.
Lost in the middle of the Scottish lochs and heaths, the site has a rare strength and poetic quality. It can't help inspiring artists and firing the imagination. Roger crisscrosses the site and allows inspiration to carry him away.
There would be the point. That marks the equinox. It echoes the shape in the landscape, that ridge there, that notch. That's where the midwinter sun sets, because you naturally go like that when something's dazzling you, yeah? To sort of stop it from dazzling you. And I think they made that stone deliberately to hide it because it was hurting their eyes. This stone, I think, represents revering the dead, because it seems like a skeleton, yeah? So it's like revering the dead near the cairn here. Perhaps why the later people built the cairn here, because of this stone with this image on. The big stone in the centre, some people have suggested, it's like a rudder of a boat, you know, the steering part of a boat, to steer the spirits of the dead to the stars.
The Calanais, which affects us today, is the work of people who had mastered the cycle of the seasons, observed the stars, and voyaged on the ocean. Could these stones standing on the hills of Scotland be simply the symbol of a megalithic civilization?
This stone circle here is just part of that Atlantic tradition, which you will have links all the way down the Atlantic coast. There's lots of evidence to suggest that people are moving up and down the Atlantic seaways, but also ideas and traditions as well.
Some thousands of kilometers to the south, like an echo to Calanais, silhouettes of stones are lost in the sea. Witness to the changes in the landscape over 5,000 years, these half-drowned arcs of standing stones intrigue us. Sited in the Gulf of Morbihan, the island of Er Lannic has been declared a natural reserve. It is only accessible by sea, and it is forbidden to set foot there. So Laurent Lescop is taken there in a boat by Yves Belenfant, who knows the place well.
It's a double semicircle, really. It's not completely two arcs of a circle. So there we can see the first, and the second you can't see because it's completely immersed. Here we're at full tide, so at full tide they're at about 3 to 4 meters maximum. The monoliths that we see here in the first arc, well, there's a big one there, the one at the summit, but the monoliths of the second semicircle, which are completely immersed, are 3 to 4 times bigger.
Archaeological excavations made near the stones have given clues to the function of the site.
When we look at the archaeological material that has been found, there's over a ton of pottery and traces of elements of fumigation. So this could have links with some kind of cult practice. There were also a number of little flint arrows, and as well there were casings, and in these casings were the burned bones of cattle. So we have something which has perhaps a lot more to do with the ceremony, cult of some kind, but what kind, it's very hard to say.
One thing is sure is that the semicircles of stone were raised on dry land in a very different landscape, which has since been altered by the changing climate. Laurent has made a photographic survey of the site to model it in 3D and simulate the original environment. 5,000 years ago, it's estimated the water level was 6 to 8 meters lower.
It's true that imagining this place without water requires a little effort of the imagination. So this image will help that effort of imagination. It's a model which will help to understand the proportions of this to the scale of the landscape.
These standing stones were without doubt part of a group of interconnected sites. In fact, far off, on the other side of the sea, is a construction of dry stones which the archaeologists call a cairn. The cairn of Gavrinis is a funerary monument built around 4,000 years BC. Beneath this massive stone is hidden a treasure, and this is one of the sites explored by Laurent Lescop. 22 of the 24 blocks of stone which make up the inner corridor and funeral chamber are entirely covered in carvings. The site is known for this reason as the Neolithic 16 Chapel. Laurent is carefully surveying all the stones to model them in 3D and thus be able to better decipher the motifs.
We can see the carvings much more precisely. One very important element is the position of each carving within the global space. That is to say, up till now, what we had been seeing were carvings reproduced on a plan. So we had little idea of the volume over which the carving stretched. However, at Gavrinis, by closely observing all of the stones, we see that some carvings are directed by the volume of the stones, by the starting model that the stone offered. Given the density, the regularity, and the way in which things have been done, we can ask ourselves if it was the same hand which carved the whole site. And in that case, we would have ourselves here a Michelangelo of that time. One of the remarkable elements is found here. These are in fact boats, they are here and there. And then these elements, like points, will be the crew. It's a way of representing the boats and their crews that is found in a lot of carvings of this time.
The maritime environment certainly influenced the artistic repertory of the Neolithic occupants of the region.
When you see the current, you can see it makes arcs. And you could ask yourself if these forms inspired what we find inside.
Laurent's objective is also to make a precise 3D model of the exterior of the site.
Here, for example, we have the general volume of the cairn as a scatter plot, and you can see there are some elements missing, which will probably be completed by the shots we take with the drone. With the images taken by the drone, I'll be able to have the whole of the site all at once, with a lot of detail, which will then come in very, very useful.
Okay, we'll take off.
Can we sweep the facade there?
Yes, of course. We'll go from left to right.
There, that's perfect. The use of models for the exterior is to get the complete volume and the interior to have detail of all the carvings, to relate the inside to the outside, allowing us to place the corridor very precisely in the cairn and have an image a bit like an ultrasound image.
Laurent thinks that the corridor of the cairn of Gavrinis was lined up in relation to the axis of the sun at the winter solstice. On the 21st of December, the first rays of the sun light up the corridor and the funeral chamber. One more sign that shows the close link for Neolithic people between nature and all the forces that drive it.
Natural elements, whether they be stone, water, wind, or the stars, have contributed to the placing of these megaliths.
This proximity between standing stones and natural forces has helped to feed many beliefs and legends throughout the ages.
There are several legends linked to the giant Gargantua, to the fairies, to the Corrigans or Brittany elves. For example, the giant Gargantua, who often had a pebble in his shoes, pulled it out, and when it fell, it became a menhir. Or it's said that the spindle of a fairy spinning wool was turned into a menhir. Or that the dolmen, where the houses of the Corrigans, those mischievous elves that once night fell, could lead you into infernal dances, and you'd never be seen again. Very close to megalithic monuments are often found natural outcrops of rock on the surface, formed geologically by natural erosion of granite. And these rocks, which were often thought to be sacrificial stones, have led to many legends. Some menhirs were used for fertility rites for women wanting children. Small flowers braided with oil were brought to the menhir, and they rubbed their stomachs against the menhir, naked preferably, and I've seen this done. Not by New Agers, but by older folk. So it hasn't yet disappeared from tradition here. It brings us back again to the idea of a force in the stone. When you see a standing stone, I don't want to be a total Freudian, and I'm not one, but there is a phallic quality all the same in these enormous standing stones. A force in this shape of virility and potency. Nowadays, a lot of people come to find energy in these megaliths, come and place their hands upon it, or to walk around it, lie down, sit, lie and watch them. Do these stones transmit energy? Here we're flirting with what can be scientifically proved, and that which can't be, between the visible and the invisible.
It is this invisible part that Maria Wheatley is exploring. Daughter of a dowser, she quickly became interested in the energy of megaliths. Her favorite exploration ground is the site of Avebury, where anybody fascinated by menhir should visit.
It's a special area because it contains earth energy, and that's what our ancient ancestors were looking for. This is a ley line called the St. Michael line. That's 300 miles coursing across the landscape. You get many ceremonial centres lined upon this lane. Avebury is at the exact centre of this line.
Maria thinks Avebury's site is deliberate. The site is in the middle of a flow of energy that crosses the southern United Kingdom from west to east.
When you root a standing stone into the ground on an earth current, something truly magical begins to happen. The stone absorbs the earth energy, and it kind of has these energy bands that coil around the stone. There's 5 above ground and 2 below. Band number 2 sends an electromagnetic signal to that stone, to that stone, to that stone, to that stone. So it creates a spider's web of electromagnetic energy on the inside of a stone circle.
According to Maria, the capacity of the stones to absorb energy comes from their composition.
This type of stone is a form of sandstone. Sandstone formed thousands of years ago, and it contains a lot of silicon, which is quite intriguing because when we think of silicon, we think of macrochips and microchips and everything that's revolutionized our lives, because semiconductors and those microchips are used today in our PCs, our telephones. Well, our ancient ancestors may have used them in a completely different way, because this is a massive piece of silicon put into earth energy currents to make them come alive with those energy bands. And I'm going to give you a dowsing demonstration now. This is a dowsing rod. It's made of copper and nickel, so it's quite conductive. It's particularly good at picking up these energy bands. So just by lifting the rod up the face of the stone, when it gets to the top of that 3rd energy band, there we go there, it said found. So that's the top there. We just lifted up the face of the stone again. That's particularly strong there. And lifted up the face of the stone there. That's the energy band.
Some people think the Neolithic people knew how to channel this energy.
A lot of people think somehow our ancient ancestors were able to manipulate that energy and transport stones. That sounds quite fantastic. It really does. But maybe there's a shred of evidence for that. With using our equipment, we decided to see if there was any electromagnetic activity happening in the earth currents. And what we found was 3 distinctive electromagnetic signals. There's a researcher who looks into the Bosnian pyramids, and he claims that the signal for levitation is 25 hertz. Well, we found round about 25 hertz in this earth current. So could it be that our ancient ancestors somehow knew and manipulated that frequency of levitation?
Maria also thinks she has unlocked the secret of why the megalithic sites have such an attraction for us.
With our equipment, we realised that the earth currents and underground water, a particular type of underground water, emits a frequency, and that frequency is 7 hertz. Well, what does that mean? 7 hertz is when you feel relaxed. It's like when you're in a meditative state. So I'm sure that is why people are drawn to these sites. They know what's good for them, and they feel that there's something about these sites. They make them feel good.
The energy released by these sites attracts us even today, although, according to Maria, our ancestors could feel it much more powerfully.
Our ancestors were more connected to the landscape, and also I think their sensitivity was increased. Today we just walk around, we've got synthetic clothes on made of nylon, some of us wear synthetic shoes, we're not connected to the earth, so we've lost that connection. I feel ancient sites, they're places where we can get a connection back to Mother Earth. So it's about really connecting back to the earth and seeing the earth in all of her glory.
Megaliths attract us through their evocative power, for they draw us back to the origins of our culture. They illustrate an essential period of humanity's history, 6,000 years ago, when our ancestors settled, marked out their territory, buried their dead, and set the foundations of a civilization which the megaliths symbolized spectacularly. While science has allowed us to better understand who built these monuments, at what time they were built, and how, a question has never been answered: why? For our ancestors took with them the rituals and beliefs that brought these places to life.